Hi guys, welcome back to Juice Kitchen, and we are back with new recipes. I know it's been a really long time since we've made anything for you, and today we are going to make a golden sauce. Why a golden sauce? That's because we'll be using our famous Lakadong turmeric. The ingredients that you need for this recipe are some white sesame seeds and pumpkin seeds that I've turned into a paste. You can use any other seeds that you would want. And we also have some mustard. I'm using a Dijon mustard that I found on the grocery store. And I'm also using soybean sauce. We have a lemon. We would want to squeeze the juice out of that lemon. And then we have our Zizira products. That is the Makhir ginger that I'm pretty sure most of you have heard about. This is the Makhir. And then we have the black pepper from Zizira. And then we have our famous Lakadong turmeric that brings this recipe together. So let's start with a simple recipe. You don't need anything, just a bowl and a whisk. Alright, in this bowl we will combine all our ingredients, starting with our white sesame and pumpkin seed paste. Okay, we'll just get into the bowl. That was easy. We will add, I forgot to mention, as part of the ingredient, we need some water. Just about 2 teaspoons of water. And next we will add our soybean sauce. We won't add too much of it because it will give a really strong color. We'll add just a little. The next ingredient is our mustard. Makhir ginger. You can always substitute this for onion powder or garlic powder if you have. Just half a teaspoon because this is also a really strong ingredient. Next ingredient is our black pepper. We add black pepper because it helps our body absorb the curcumin from the turmeric. Then we have our famous Lakadong turmeric. Okay, and the last thing on the list is our lemon juice. I'm going to squeeze some lemon juice into this. And for the easiest part of them all, we're going to whisk all these ingredients together. Alright, so our golden sauce is now ready. And just before this episode, I roasted some vegetables, some purple cabbage and some colorful capsicums. And all we have to do now is plate it together with the sauce. For the plating, I've used 2 leaves of the purple cabbage that I also roasted. And we're going to begin our plating just a little bit fancy here with the leaves. You can get creative like that. So to this we'll add our roasted vegetables. And then we will add the sauce that we had just made. You can also add some fruits here like pomegranate or any other nuts. And it's done! Today's Juice Kitchen recipe. Some roasted vegetables with our golden sauce. I hope you liked this recipe, and if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Zizira to get more videos on Juice Kitchen recipes. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.